Good morning, class. Here we are on Chapter 5 already. Man, the semester is going by real quick. I can't believe we're already at Chapter 5. But now we're going to start, the first 4 chapters we had kind of, did some more introductory material, kind of want to incorporate you into kind of the world of total rewards and compensation, some of the basic things that you may have learned in other classes. But now we're going to start getting a little bit more of the details that make for a solid total reward strategy. And for those of you who are maybe interested in compensation or total rewards as a career, this will be a great kind of the meat and potatoes, if you will, of kind of what the world of compensation is all about. Chapter 5, we're going to be talking a lot about internal structures. And if you take a look at this slide, you'll kind of see how there's 2 different ways to look at an internal structure. You have a job-based and a person-based. And in this chapter, we're going to talk about what does that job-based looks like. So a couple of purposes. First off, we want to collect and summarize the information. Basically, we get all of our data, our analysis, everything that we need to do to make a solid decision and figure out what type of job we're looking to incorporate. Then we need to determine what value we're going to assign to that job. There's an old saying, is a CEO more valuable than a janitor? You could make the argument that to be a CEO, you have to have more years of experience, you have to have maybe advanced education, you have to be able to do whatever it is. But in the relative world of evaluation and relative value, is that job more valuable than a janitor? Well, if you're a janitor, if there's a mess and you clean it up, you can see that you actually had an effect on doing something positive. Whereas a CEO, for example, the work that they do may be more subtle or may not even show up for years down the road. So determining value and assessing relative value of jobs is one of the hardest things that compensation professionals work with, so it's something that we want to look at. And then how do we translate that into structure specifically? How do we look at and make it a set system so that our incumbents will understand it, will recognize it, and then when they come for questions, we'll be able to explain it to them as total rewards professionals. So that's kind of what we're looking to do in this type of chapter. So with that, one of the key things that we're going to be talking about is job evaluation. How do we value jobs? How do we assess value? And how do we turn that into a structure that gives us that value? And here's the definition of job evaluation. And again, what we're trying to do is do an assessment and have an understanding of what the job is. And again, it sounds really simple because if you are a lawyer, for example, then most people know what lawyers do. They argue in court, they write briefs, they defend clients, they do all these different things. But when we break it down into smaller individual tasks, what does that really entail? Or for example, one of the things that we talk about in compensation is if you're a tax attorney, is that different than being a criminal defense attorney? Well, obviously they're both attorneys. They have the same basic skill sets. They probably went to the same type of schooling, but the jobs and the skills needed, the evaluation to do those jobs could be completely different. So our evaluation is going to kind of give us, when we blend everything together, what the job is truly going to be entailing. One of the key things that we have to do in this world is benchmark jobs. We have to look at how do we compare jobs? How do we determine where we get our data, our information? So if you look at this, for example, let's look at the administrative group. And if you see the bottom 4, starting with principal, administrative secretary, all the way down to clerk and messenger, these are all highlighted because these are jobs that we are kind of easier to determine. So if we want to have an administrative assistant and we want to look at how do we write that job description, it's good to benchmark that job against these other 4 jobs. These other 4 jobs will help tell us the types of work that goes into being an administrative assistant. So if you are an admin assistant, you probably have maybe experience working as a word processor. You know how to type. You know how to do correspondence. As a clerk, you've probably maybe ran messages or taking phone messages or maybe been sent on mail runs, for example. All of those things could be individual jobs, but it's good for us to know that because those components will go into an administrative assistant job. So it's good that we kind of incorporate that. Look at the technical group, for example. If our goal is to hire that top of that column, which is a head or a chief scientist, well, to know what a chief scientist is, we need to know what a a regular scientist does, maybe even an associate scientist. So we take kind of the baseline information and we start adding to it and building it so that we can kind of ultimately determine what we want. And being a scientist, there probably is a certain degree of technical knowledge that has to go along with it. You know, if you're a biologist, you need to know how to operate a microscope, for example. So maybe having that technical skills and maybe knowing what a microscope technician does will help you in determining what ultimately a head scientist does. So that's something that you definitely want to consider as well, is how do you benchmark different jobs? How do you compare jobs to each another? And again, you have to start kind of getting specific, because if I say I want to be a professional athlete someday, well, that's all well and good, but does that mean I'm going to play football? Does that mean I'm going to be a tennis player? Does that mean I'm going to be a track athlete? They're all athletes, but they all have so many different comparisons, and the sports are so different, it's hard to compare one to the other. So we have to be able to find jobs that are similar enough that we can compare them and ultimately be able to determine their relative value to the organization. And in Chapter 5, one additional point I want to make is, and this is something that you want to definitely read about for the exam, is the 3 different types of job evaluations. You know, there are a couple more that are used out in industry, but for our purposes here for this class, we're going to focus on the big 3. One is called ranking, one is called classification, and one is called the point method. And again, make sure you check the PowerPoint presentation as well as your textbook for more detailed analysis of what those truly are. But again, most in organizations will use what is called the ranking system because it's fast and easy. You basically just, as it says, you rank jobs based on their relative value. It is the easiest and is the most commonly used in organizations. You know, so a ranking system, you may have, you know, somebody who mops the floor, and that person reports to a supervisor who oversees a shift. That supervisor reports to a manager who oversees the whole operation. Maybe that manager reports to maybe a store owner who owns the business and then is responsible for the profits and everything. Kind of a ranking, you know, vertical, similar way of looking at things. That's the most common. And again, there's 2 other methods, the classification method and the point method. Please make sure you review that information because, again, it will be valuable information for us later in the semester when you will actually utilize these methods in one of our future assignments, as well as for the exam. Thanks, everyone, for Chapter 5, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.